Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the Demon for Peace community. Welcome to this week's edition of the M&E Thursday Talks on DME for Peace. These Thursday Talks are made possible with the support of the Carnegie Corporation of New York through the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium. Just in case you've forgotten, my name is Jack Farrell, and I am the DME for Peace Project Manager at Search for Common Ground based in Washington, D.C. Today, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Valentine Gandhi of the Development Cafe to lead a discussion on using blockchain technology in development programming. A note about our format for those of you who are new to the Thursday Talks. Once Valentine has finished his presentation, we'll jump right into questions and answers. You can ask questions in advance of the discussion portion by submitting them through the question function on GoToWebinar throughout the presentation. I'm now going to hand over to today's host, Valentine. You're very welcome. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Yeah, I'm speaking from Jakarta, so it's 10 p.m. So if I sound a bit sleepy, please wake me up in middle. So yeah, my name is Valentine, and I work for an organization called the Development Cafe, which is a organization that was founded in 2001 as a think tank for connecting people and policy as well as resources with people who need them. So it essentially has three research pillars. One is on research for development, the other innovation in ICT4D, and the last pillar is on capacity building. Even though we have offices in 7 countries, we have through our network presence in 143 countries with a think tank having membership of 10,000 members. And we primarily are self-funded, even though we occasionally do projects for donors or governments and agencies. And we also have co-working spaces, especially one in Jakarta for refugees and so on and so forth. That's one of our funding models. Our interest in this space, whether it's blockchains or ICT4D, largely comes from the concept of frugal innovation on how technology often tends to be a bridge. Instead of being a bridge, tends to be a divide. And a lot of folks in the areas that we work with tend to get left out, largely because of access to technology or expense of technology or the lack of availability of technology. So we tend to focus on what we call frugal innovation, and we try to push technology from our side rather than private sector or private companies pushing them to us. And quite often we see this shiny gadget syndrome where people have a new technology and they look for problems rather than creating solutions around problems or working with people to decide. So we do it in small scales. We recently started working on blockchains, but we do a lot of IoTs or Internet of Things sensors for agriculture and data collections in conflict zones and so on and so forth. And we also do big data and machine learning and AI. Going to today's topic on blockchain, I think in the last 2 years that I've been involved with blockchain, a little bit of background of me. I started my career as a software programmer and then moved to development 17 years ago. And then I did my master's in social work and PhD in economics. So I've been in development, but at the same time, trying to integrate ICT4D in the work that I've done. I've worked on a range of issues from agriculture to refugees and migrants, and I've also worked a lot in conflict zones. Coming back to what is blockchain, blockchain is basically a decentralized database or a public registry of assets. Imagine if you were in a village and there is a village office which has the records of all the transactions that goes on, who owns what land and who doesn't own. You remove that village office and every individual in a particular village has a ledger of who owns what. And that is what blockchain is. It's a decentralized database. A lot of people have asked, how is it different from Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies? Essentially, Bitcoins run on blockchain technology. So blockchain is not the thing, it's the thing in which the others operate around it. A Bitcoin is the virtual equivalent of a currency that is accepted or attributed value. Like for example, or rather less far-fetched example would be a diamond is probably a commonly available stone because it's carbon. But when you create a market around it and attributed value, it adds value to it. Same way cryptocurrency is a bunch of people coming to a consensus and giving an attributed value, but that sits in a database which is immutable. The transactions are covered in blocks, and that is the blockchain. So a blockchain can be used without considering the use of bitcoins, although a bitcoin cannot be used without a blockchain. So that is the difference. So if you start using blockchain, you don't need to always worry about bitcoins unless you are into using cryptocurrencies, or if you're raising funds using cryptocurrencies. Nearly all of our work, we have social networks involved. If you do in conflict zones, we will sometimes work with this cascade effect model or building social network analysis. So all of them have social networks play a crucial role in development sector. And blockchain is like having a mega social network of people who come to a consensus. Oftentimes people you don't know, but you don't move forward unless everybody agrees to it. That reduces the fraud, or reduces the transactions and increases the transparency. How is it different from a traditional database? I'm going to leave this PowerPoint with you. I'm just walking through since we have very little time, and I'm sure a lot of you have questions. So I think Jack will share this PowerPoint if you want to have detailed questions, and you can write to me later. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. The traditional databases usually have a client server network architecture, which means there is a user ID, there's a central administrator. If you are in the system, whether you are using a ERP system or even a simple email, you get access based on your privilege. You can be an administrator of an organization or simply a user, but you always log into an interface, and then somebody gives you that privilege, and there's a middle cloud server or a hard copy server. In a blockchain's database, there is no client server network architecture. Every node or every participant in a blockchain is the own administrator and have the equal rights to participate, translate, transfer, and move. And because everybody agrees and the nodes don't move from one block to the other, there is a security that is guaranteed, and it's very difficult to tamper with. And even if you do, the block doesn't move, so it is easily detected. And that's why integrity and transparency are key things why the first industry to pick up blockchains is the financial industry, the fintech groups. A lot of the transactions from Wall Street or banks are moving to fintech systems to have quicker and also transparent transactions. uh, Also, in traditional databases, we have this crude commands: create, read, update, and delete. But in a blockchain, you can't delete. A data is permanently stored and cannot be altered. So they only have the read and write operations. Later, I will mention for the GDPR requirements, because you can't alter data if you're within the EU. The people who use blockchain technology, including some of us who use data from within the EU, are trying to see ways in which to comply to GDPR by using an append and burn kind of commands. But basically, all databases, whether you use a simple Excel sheet for your analysis in your everyday work, or large databases where you store massive data, has only crude all see, create, read, update, and delete commands. But a blockchain does not have a delete command. It's a permanent record. How is trust created among untrusted individuals? Usually, blockchain is a public blockchain. Is a peer-to-peer social network of multiple computers sitting in multiple locations, moving transactions forward. And so how do you identify trust? So recently, if some of you have seen, Stanford came up with a very comprehensive report on blockchains for social impact, and they say the key elements that establish trust. In technical terms, this particular thing is described as the Byzantine consensus, or Byzantine generals' confusion consensus, where there are 4 Byzantine generals who attack a fort, but 2 of them are hand in glove with the fort that is being attacked. So the attack could fail. So the same way, when a transaction moves from one to another, unless all 4 in a block or all 4 people in a particular block agree, the transaction doesn't move forward. So how do you create that kind of a consensus? Basically, these 3 elements are automatically established in a blockchain: who is who owns what, whether it's a digital or a physical asset, and verification of what is true. And blockchains allow users to easily prove their identities. So identity doesn't necessarily mean your physical identity. These are hashed keys. So this wallet belongs to someone, or this transaction belongs to someone. So each of your transaction is converted into a hash. A hash is nothing but a digital representation of your identity. It'll be in a bunch of codes. So even if you look at it, unless you convert it back into another transaction, you won't know it is who it is. So sometimes people have asked me that if it is so public, am I not vulnerable if I use blockchain? But you are not vulnerable, because while technically someone can see your transaction, you won't actually know it belongs to, let's say, Jack or Val, for that matter. So this is a description of what is this, who's who, and who owns what, and what's true. I'm not going to walk through it, but please feel free to read through this later. But whether you want a blockchain or not for your particular project, whatever that is that you're working on, you can use some of these diagrams that have been put as a due diligence tool. This is one of the simplest ones. Do you need a shared common database in your project? If you say yes, you can ask, do you need multiple parties, multiple stakeholders? Usually yes. And parties involved have conflicting incentives and are not trustable? Yes, because they are sometimes unknown public. Rules are uniform. Need for an objective. Rules of transactions do not change. And are these transactions public? Then if you have answered yes to all of these, then you have a public blockchain. A Bitcoin sits in a public blockchain. But if you start your own project, these are called DApps, or decentralized application, which is very similar to mobile apps. So you can create a DApp using platforms that exist like within the Bitcoin or Ethereum. These are all companies which have provided this platform. Just like, for instance, if you're creating a mobile app, you use an Android platform, or if you use JavaScript or C++, you can basically use any of these languages to create a blockchain. So permission blockchain is when you create that, but within your circle of trust, but it is still a blockchain. But if you've answered no to any of these, then you do not need a blockchain. This slide is a slightly more technical and complex one, and this one is specific to ICT projects for agriculture. Again, if I walk you through this, you might get confused, but please have a look at it and send me an email about it. Basically, a block consists of a reference to the previous block, the proof of work, what happened as a transaction, the timestamp, what time did it happen, and the Merkle tree, and the number of transactions that precluded in this block, what happened in that block. What I mean by transactions is, supposing there is a payment made in return for a service, that is recorded in the entire series is recorded. Where do you use blockchains immediately? Well, people have hyped blockchain as it's changing the world, it's the end of poverty, or it's going to solve, and it's the superman of earth, and so many things, which is usually the case in many of the hyped IT. But realistically speaking, blockchain is very useful if you are in any industry or any sector that uses supply chains to create transparencies. Like in Senegal, for example, one of the projects that we are beginning to start, Senegal suffers from a lot of unregulated fishing and non-traceable fishing, illegal fishing, so on and so forth. And so much so that even the military is involved in tracing who are the boats, who are the stealing the fishing industry, and they have a loss of up to $300 million a year, which is huge for Senegal or any other country. And so blockchain, we are trying to apply to see if we can track it from ocean to table. How do we do that? Each time a fish is caught, there is a IoT based sensor. Blockchain by itself is simply a database, but in order to store in it, you need some sort of a system. That's why IoTs and blockchain go very well. If you don't know IoTs, it's basically Internet of Things, which is any chip that is found in a mobile phone, or if you work on GIS, or if you're in precision farming or agriculture sector, you use sensors in the field to track, let's say, photosynthesis levels or oxygen levels or soil moisture, so on and so forth. These are very thin. I talked about frugal innovation. A smartwatch costs, let's say, a Samsung smartwatch costs $900, but you can make a sensor for $6 with the complete facilities of what a Samsung watch is. So things are getting cheaper. It's just that because more and more development folks don't push technology, and all often our technology pushes us, we don't know, and we end up paying a high premium for anything from a website to advanced technology, because we don't venture into these technologies. That's why we try to, at Dev Cafe, we try to test these and use it among the development communities. And in healthcare, to share databases, and in fintech, which is financial technology and financial inclusion, identity for CRVS in Indonesia, they're trying it. We have our own projects where we create identities here and in Finland. I'll talk a little bit about it. And M&E, for instance, in Somalia, we have some projects on data collection in remote areas, where you want to measure and track when a farmer goes to the field on appropriate time, and because of the wristband which has their sensors, which transmits data to the blockchain. So these are ways in which you can track data that you would otherwise rely on third-party monitors or consultants and proxies, which you can directly monitor. And then using bitcoins has also increased the way in which, or expanded the way in which, organizations are raising funds, like impact investments or capital markets are trying to directly fund through blockchains, through way of coins and tokens, to companies, I mean, to social enterprises and NGOs who are starting up, which is gaining a lot more traction as we go on and go forward. Some of the components that we use in these sectors are, one is that smart contract. Smart contract is like an online escrow, where a particular action has to happen in order for a response to occur. So in one of our projects, a farmer has to adopt best practices, and that would earn him or her a token, which he or she can exchange for subsidies, or for cash. And then transactions are transparent, like I explained in the fisheries, and then data monitoring on real time, and of course product tracking, like WFP sends relief work, and they have tried to use blockchains to track whether it reaches where it's supposed to reach, and so on and so forth. In our project, which is called Project I Am in Indonesia, as well as we are partnering with colleagues in Finland, we have a impact investment project or impact sourcing project, where we train refugees who have no identity, and involve them or engage them with digital jobs that they work either directly through company or Upwork and freelancer.com. And in countries where they are able or allowed to receive in cryptocurrencies, they do receive it through debit card payments, or they receive it through an e-wallet which sits within the blockchain. So what we are building or built is a blockchain that looks a bit like LinkedIn, but within a blockchain system, where a refugee who has no ID is able to create an ID through his or her biometrics. And there are 6 different individuals within the block who verify his or her ID, including us, who in this case act as a quote unquote agent, and then his colleagues and people who have used his or her services. So if you have a digital job, for example, we recently completed a job application for, a jobs app for a company in Geneva, which was created purely by refugees within the project I Am. And so they do it, and then they hire the refugees through the platform based on their skill set, and then they get paid through the blockchain. So even if you don't have ID, because of the consensus mechanism within the blockchain and the verification and the experience, you are able to connect people who do not have jobs. First, we also provide the IT training for those who are interested, and then we have the co-working space where they work on it. So that's one of the ways in which we are using blockchain, largely because they don't have physical ID. And the other one, which is we are still piloting, is this Sticky Rice project, which is with Peterson Asia, which is a private company, which is a blockchain that is designed to also uses IoT systems that is designed to capture data from farmer who follow what is known as SRP, or Sustainable Rice Platform, which is a consortium of 22 members based in the Philippines, headed by International Rice Research Institute. And they have set up specific set of standards for rice farmers to adopt, which is for climate smart agriculture. So we have recruited local kiosks and set up a blockchain based POS, or point of sale system, where the farmer, if they adopt these practices, best practices, they earn a carbon credit or a methane credit, and that they exchange at these kiosks for cash or subsidies to the farms. So it benefits both the climate as well as the farmer to make additional income. This is again in a pilot, and we don't know. And because there are 144 million rice farmers, and this is piloting only 1 million, we don't know how successful it would be, because blockchain is still a nascent technology. And as dev cafe, we don't push anything and say, this is great, but we like to test and research it and find the flaws in it, and so on and so forth. I was talking about GDPR, and that's why we are still trying to find out, if we are working with EU data sets, can we move into what is known as append and burn? Once a blockchain transaction is executed, does it can we set it up in such a way it can burn? That's one of the solutions being considered, so that you don't store EU citizens data. And IoTs and blockchains, it is the next big thing, because blockchains are ultimately a storage and a database, but and of course there's smart contracts and so on and so forth. But in order to store and make it automated, you need things like IoT, so they have to go hand in hand. What we are trying to do is compile and engage people who are using blockchains in different spheres within the development sector, and again trying to minimize people who run behind the hype and say, yeah, this is blockchain, so let's find a problem and provide the solution, but rather designing it around. And we are working with a lot of evaluators to see, as well as researchers, to see which use cases can be used in which area, and documenting it systematically. One of the things that is coming up in July, where we are trying to do it with Professor Michael Bamberger and Professor Rick Davis, who are in big data and most significant change, is to combine innovations, big data, blockchains, and human-centered design in adaptive programming, where we examine different case studies and scenarios and say, yes, this is what the blockchain technology can do. How can we apply it in, let's say, in the context of refugees? And if it is applied, is it really different from in case you had used a traditional database, and how is it advantageous? The study by Stanford that was done very recently, I'm sure some of you have seen it, but I have a link to it in the slide, showed that 20% of the 195 projects that they studied would not have been possible without the use of blockchain technology, largely because of the traceability and immutability. So in conclusion, I don't know if I went over my time, blockchain is basically a public digital ledger, and you need to do your due diligence to ensure whether it is applicable or not. But if you are in these fields of agriculture, healthcare, fintech, identity, and M&E, can already see at least a pilot project. You can start to see how it can be expanded. And there are challenges to it in terms of energy consumption, and people are trying to promote more energy, reducing things like wireless spectrum or solar power panels for mining transactions, and so on and so forth. But because we are not building mining based bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, but rather creating a blockchain alone, it wouldn't cost more than what you would to have a traditional database, which you would have anyway done, but except that this improves the efficiency of transactions. So that I have also put a grape farming example for you to follow up. If you see from farm to table how a particular grape farming transaction happens or sits within the blockchain, for those of you who are interested in the technical side of it. I think I'll stop for now, and I'll open the floor to questions.
Valentine, thank you very much for the detailed presentation. To the audience, as Valentine has mentioned, we will make sure that we have these slides available on DME for Peace alongside the recording later today, so you can access them and actually learn from the huge amount of information that we're seeing here from Valentine. Just before we enter the Q&A, I want to make a disclaimer. This is a new topic for many people today. There is no such thing as a silly question. There is a lot of hype and buzz around blockchain technology, so please feel free to be comfortable to ask your question, because I'm sure you're not the only one thinking it. And also, I will do my best to translate the most technical questions that you possibly ask, because I know that we also have extremely sort of experienced blockchain practitioners on the line. And just a note about our format, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Thursday Talks, you can submit a question one of two ways. The first way you can submit a question is through the question function on GoToWebinar, which will allow you to type your question. The second way you can submit a question is to click on the little hand icon to raise your hand, and that will allow us to unmute your microphone, allowing you to ask your question live, which is always nice. When you do submit your question, we ask that you submit your name and affiliation. And just a note, these talks are recorded and posted on DME for Peace, so those who are not able to join us at this time can go back and listen to the presentation and learn from our wider discussion. Now, the questions are already coming thick and fast, so we're going to jump right in. And the first one comes from, if I can get it up, the first one comes from Etta Kanini, and Etta asks, how do I access the blockchain database? Is it free to access, or do I need to subscribe? And if so, how much does it cost?
So can I answer right now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So if you're part of a blockchain, you can access it through a public forum. If you're using a private blockchain, the person who created the blockchain would give you a sign-up login, and then you can become part of that blockchain. Otherwise, if you want to be part of a blockchain publicly, you can go to sites like MetaMask, and then you are already part of it's metamask.io. If you go, you become part of the public blockchain. It doesn't cost anything to join a blockchain.
Great, thank you very much, Val, and thank you.
It's simply an access to a database. If you want to transact in Bitcoins, then and make transactions, then it will cost as much as your transaction would cost. But to be part of a database, if it's a public blockchain, you can just go to sites like MetaMask, or if it's a private blockchain, whoever is including you in that private blockchain would give you access to it.
Thank you very much, Val. The next question comes from Shaylee Adenolfi, and this is on the technical side of things. And Shaylee asks, could you please tell us your views on existing decentralized, aka DLT, blockchain-based identity solutions on the market, pros and cons to tokenization versus non-tokenized, APIs, wallet versus no wallet, etc. And what is your approach, thought on compliance with GDPR, architecture versus ZK proofs?
There's a lot of questions in this. I think tokenized systems works when you are using smart contracts, or if you are involving some sort of a give and take, to put it very simply. And I think identity solutions, I think if I remember clearly, the person who asked is from BankU and Ashish, and I think they are one of the most advanced at the moment in checking the identities and selling cash. So yeah, and also for our RISE project, we don't call it a token, but basically a carbon credit. It acts as a token or replaces a token. So it's useful when there's a give and take, or there's a transaction in a smart contract. But if you're simply using a database to record transactions, I don't think you always need a token. I don't know if it answers that first part of your questions. With regard to GDPR, I don't think there is a question of whether we follow it or not. It's really about deciding how do we comply to it. And that's why I said one of the alternatives that is being suggested is from the crude function, and except the read and write, we also have a append and burn, where it's like you lock your car and throw your keys away once you've locked your car, kind of solution that is being offered. It's not perfect yet because GDPR is coming and people are building blockchains, which is kind of a paradox because blockchain is an open access, open data, and GDPR is talking about protecting your data and or protecting the transactions and so on and so forth, specific to a particular set of citizens. So that is something we haven't explored. I don't know if I can use the word. Thankfully, we don't use a lot of EU-based at the moment, EU-based data sets. So we haven't explored it. But given that we are, or even next month, we are organizing a workshop specifically on exploring this, how can we build consensus and comply to it. I think someone from BankU is also coming to that, which we are organizing jointly with USAID and UNCDF in Bangkok. I can also send folks, if you're in Bangkok, information on that, where that's why I said we need more and more development folks to hash out these things, because when you are a technical person, you only look at, okay, this is what it is, this is my investor, and this is what I have to pay for, or this is the international compliance. But the institutionalized and social aspects come much later after something has been hashed out. And recently I was in this Tech London when someone said, let the private sector deal with it, and after the mess we can take over. But I don't think so. In technologies like blockchain, we should be there from the beginning and kind of guide the technology. Does it answer your question?
Great.
I'm not sure. If not, I'll follow up.
I think you did your very best for that detailed question. Thank you, Shaylee, for your contribution. The next question comes from Ellen Partridge, and I think it's something that I'm seeing in a few of the questions filtering in today about blockchain. It sounds great, but what are the downsides of using blockchain?
If you use blockchains where it is not necessary, you are just wasting energy and what a traditional database can do, because modern shared ledgers, modern shared databases do a lot of work that blockchains can do. So unless you have made a due diligence, like using some of these charts that I showed, where you see a concrete benefit in it. I mean, I read recently that companies have shot up their stock prices simply by adding the word blockchain to their business model. But in development, we can't follow that kind of hype. And there are many case studies of using ICT technology where in that context it wouldn't work, but because there's money around it or because it sounds like a hype, we use it. Otherwise, downside of using it is really, if you follow the hype, there is a downside to it. And as an ICT person, because we always have this due diligence in mind, I wouldn't say that there is a, if you don't follow the hype, and if you have systematically done your homework on why you would use your blockchain, especially in the areas and fields that I've mentioned, then there is no downside to it. It's ultimately a database, and there is no downside to using any database.
So, Valentine, building off that, you've explained that the downside is that it's a waste of energy, not if it's not suited to your project. Would you be able to sort of give us an example of maybe you have it in your own work where you might have been working with something that looked like it could have been used for blockchain, but you decided to go against that? Or example where you haven't used blockchain where you thought it may have been applicable?
So blockchain is not a replacement for traditional transactions or traditional databases. It just adds value. Like for instance, if we were not working with refugees here who do not have identity, Indonesia is a non-1955, 1951 Refugee Convention signatory, non-signatory, which means they don't have ID. All they have is the UNHCR ID. So how do we train kids who are committing suicide because they're stuck here for 5 years in the prime of their youth and make them belong to a system, belong to a unit where they feel belonged? In those cases, we can't do that with an Excel sheet or a traditional database. So we made the decision to use a blockchain to give them that inclusive access to same thing that any person in Earth. I mean, I laugh at the word refugee because we all belong to one Earth, and calling someone a refugee is probably the ridiculous thing I've heard in my whole life. But so in that case, we say that yes, at least make this an inclusive database where they feel belonged and they're able to go to a mobile phone, log in using only their eyes. And another advantage is in this RISE platform, we don't think all 1 million rice farmers have a legal identity, and if how do we register them into the blockchain? So we use biometrics, so they don't have to carry a wallet or cash or a mobile phone. All they need is once to record it, and once they come, they're able to see the entire transaction they did with their farm in the last season. So in these cases, when we are trying to simplify complex problems, it has been useful, which we can't use in traditional databases or ERP systems.
Great. Thank you very much, Val. The next question comes from Kath Thompson. And Kath writes, thank you very much. This is fascinating. Can you speak a little more about how the translation of cryptocurrency digital earnings into cash works? In your Sticky Rice project, for example, participants get cash at kiosks, but where does that cash come from and who is supplying that? And I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit more on how this helps the unbanked. They still have to access cash at some sort of institution. Is that correct?
So the cash is not from an institution, it's from a pilot project from Peterson Asia, which is a compliance private company. It's probably one of our first private sector partnerships, but it is a research and development project. So the cash comes from the compliance units within the Peterson Asia, who have a benefit in training the farmers in using the SRP standards. If you are in front of your computer, you can, I mean, of course you are. If you Google sustainablerice.org, so it has this SRP system. So people who comply to that have multiple different, different types of projects that they are testing to ensure climate smart agricultural practices are harnessed by rice farmers or used by rice farmers. One of them is they have this token based or cash based system where there is a particular set of cash available from multiple donors. I think it's funded by EU and UNEP and several others, and they have this project where each time a farmer earns a credit, they're able to exchange it for cash. And this is not a Bitcoin kind of a credit. This is preset that a token is this much subsidy or this much amount. So it's not exactly like how a Bitcoin would work. Bitcoin depends on a market price, just like a US dollar. But this within this project, each carbon credit is given an attributed value already set in the project. So that's what they will earn. And then they are able to accumulate that and exchange it for actual cash, and each of them have a specific budget. I don't know the exact figures, but I'm happy to share them with you. But this is, again, I said, a research for development project, and if it works very well, then it will be expanded to the next 144 million, the whole 144 million rice farmers.
Great, thank you, Val, and thank you, Kath, for a great question. Next question comes from Lindsay McCall, who has asked, is there an international regulator on the use of blockchains, or are there national regulators? How is this regulated?
So each country has its own regulations on cryptocurrencies, but not specifically on blockchains. For instance, in Indonesia, you can have blockchains, you can have cryptocurrencies, but you can't transact in them. Even then, you can transact in them, but the ultimate product has to be in Indonesian rupiah. In Germany and Finland, which are our other project IAM partner countries where our refugee project happens, there is no such regulations. So there is no consolidated mechanism. It's really depends on that country's laws, which change. Until December, cryptocurrencies was okay in Indonesia, for instance, and our main office is in Nairobi, and Nairobi is quite open to blockchains and cryptocurrencies. So it really country specific at the moment, and that's why it's important to have this dialogue more and more, because this technology is taking over, like much like how internet was in the beginning. That's why they call it the fourth revolution: big data, IoTs, artificial intelligence, and blockchains as a one package. So it's important for us in the development sector to guide some of these dialogues. Even if you don't understand the technicalities of it, you can see that it is growing on a daily basis. Initially we started this, like you said, as a project where we thought this has a better chance for inclusiveness for refugees. And that's how it started. And by the time now, we have 4 active projects specifically using blockchains. So it's growing at a fast pace. So I would say that you need to follow which country you are and check out the regulations. But there is no consolidated one central governing authority, and people are working towards it. And EU personally is promoting it on one side. They've just launched a grant for $4 million for any blockchain technology, and they launched it 6 months ago, due in Jan 2019. But at the same time, they have the GDPR. So that's why I'm saying it's the it's the paradox. So we need to really test it and see.
Thank you, Val, and thank you, Lindsay, for your question. The next question comes from Cheyenne Sherbatke Church, and Cheyenne asks, could you speak more about the pros and cons of using blockchain for evaluation? The example appeared to be mostly about efficiency of data collection. So I'd love to hear more about the pros and cons. Thanks.
So pros and cons of evaluation, it is for us personally, based on our case study, instead of giving a generic thing. If you are in a conflict zone where, let's say, if you're collecting data in Somalia, for instance, and you want to store instant data, make sure it is collected through IoTs, it makes complete sense. But whether it can be applied immediately to all evaluation, we don't know. This Michael Quinn Patton's developmental evaluation technique is something that you can use to test blockchains for evaluation, because it looks at the context, it looks at whether it makes sense, kind of combines PRA and design thinking. I mean, developmental evaluation, you probably know about it. So that's what we are trying to use to make sense of whether blockchain can be applicable to evaluation broadly or in specific contexts, let's say like conflict zones or in inaccessible zones where at the minute they use TPMs or third-party monitors. So to replace the third-party monitors, which is often run by some ex-military guy in a conflict zone, and we don't know the quality of data. And some of you who worked in conflict zones may have experienced this. I mean, if you go to a pilot visit in Somalia or Iraq and Afghanistan, you can see sometimes what the data shows and what's in the field is different, largely because of the quality of TPMs. So that's why we can't say that this is perfect solution there. That's why we can use methodologies like developmental evaluation, which is a unique technique to test innovations like blockchain.
And just to follow on from this, Valentine, because I see Cheyenne asked a follow-on question to this to make it a little bit more specific. In the agriculture sensor evaluation example, what added functionality was needed that only blockchain provided?
So the blockchain, our system was built directly to talk into the blockchain. And so when the farmer goes to the field at the time when there is soil moisture and he or she is not supposed to go and water, if they go, that will record in the blockchain as a transaction, which is a false, or I mean, on the scoring of best practices, it'll score as a negative. And then if he or she goes when the soil moisture is low, and at the time he or she has to go and put water, that will record as a green transaction. And it is quite transparent. I don't know if I can show you in this computer to see it real time. And if you combine it with a Power BI kind of data visualization tool or VLOOKUP, it records it easily, and the smart contract system takes over and starts giving them credit. So the only advantage on that from a traditional database is this smart contract or the online escrow, which activates the transaction. Otherwise, if you're simply recording the data to see how many times a farmer went to the field, or whatever time he or she went when they're not supposed to go, then you don't need a blockchain. But when you want to add on a smart contract which makes them earn a credit and stores that in an e-wallet, then you need a blockchain.
Great.
That's why we used a blockchain, because of the smart contract.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for being such a wonderful host and your detailed answers. We are just about on time for today, so I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you again and thank the DME for Peace audience for contributing to an absolutely fascinating discussion. I don't know about you, but that was a really, really quick 45 minutes. I know a lot of you on the line are interested in blockchain and development programming, and I was wondering if you guys have any interesting resources that you want to share with the community. Please feel free to send them to dme@dmeforpeace.org. You guys probably all get the DME for Peace emails, so please feel free to send me the resources and I can upload them so that our community of 6,000 practitioners can access these to learn more about that. We are taking a couple of weeks of break from the Thursday Talks because we've been doing them back to back for the last month. And DME for Peace is actually going to be in Stockholm next week for the Stockholm Forum, hosted by CIPRI. And we're really excited to be there to talk about the quest for shared learning and how we can evaluate and demonstrate effectiveness better. If you're going to be in Stockholm, please feel free to get in touch with me or send an email to DME for Peace. I'd love to catch up with you guys in person. Thank you again, Val, for being an amazing host. This is a great discussion, and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.